There have been some crazy things going on lately, and I have to ask the question, is the music industry cooked? I know that sounds like hyperbole, but just give me a minute to explain. Today I want to talk specifically about the Billboard charts and artists aspiring to top the charts. Now, chart performance and sales, I've talked about this in other videos. It's not something I care about, and I'm aware of the internal paradox that making a video about this creates when that's my position. But being a human being is complicated and paradoxical, and I just want to talk about some stuff here. So for anybody who doesn't know, Billboard is this company. They started out as a magazine. I don't know if they still publish the magazine, but Billboard has created this charting system that they use to track album and song sales. This is going back to like 1940, and they've created a really cool historical record to see what kind of music was popular back in the day at any given time in history.
But ain't it grand to have a gal so big and fat that when you go to hug her, you don't know where you're at?
But I don't reckon they hinder your health. I've smoked them all my life, and I ain't dead yet.
Oh, get out of here with that before I call the cop.
But the position that we find ourselves in now, I feel like Billboard has created something dangerous, something out of their control. Lately, it's inspiring artists to do a lot of crazy things just to try to get to a certain position on the charts. The way these charts work has always kind of been complicated. If you go back to like the 1940s, initially the chart had to kind of aggregate from a few different categories. They had most requested songs on the radio, most played songs in the jukebox, and most purchased singles and things like that. And then they kind of moved into a more pure sales recognition, but now we find ourselves in the streaming era, and Billboard has had to adapt to that. That is especially interesting to me because the conversion rate that they came up with for streams to sales, I think there's some magic number. It's like 15 or 1600 that they just said, this is the number of streams to equal one album sale. Here we go. I don't really know what the perfect system is, but we have what we have, and that's Billboard. There's a lot of different things you could talk about here, but to get where I'm going, first I just want to talk about the practice of bundling album sales with merch purchases. So if we go back to 2018, the big example of this was Travis Scott with his album Astroworld. Travis Scott, as most artists do, has a website available where you can buy merchandise, and with each purchase that a fan made, they'd get a free download of the album. At the time, the way sales were considered for the chart, anytime somebody bought that piece of merch, it would count as an album sale because the album was thrown in there. Seems kind of odd, and it flagged the attention of Nicki Minaj, who released her album in 2018 the week after Travis Scott went #1 with Astroworld, and he maintained his #1 over her new album, and she was very upset about this. She started talking about the bundling stuff. Sure enough, not too long from then, Billboard actually changed the rules and said, you can't do this anymore. I think that makes sense. I think the way they changed the merch rule makes sense. Now, there's a broader question to be had about why is it that these big artists on major labels, why is it that they're so concerned with chart performance? Could be something behind the scenes. It could be that the label's going to be upset if they don't. The label's pumping this kind of, budget and money into whatever they do, and that there's going to be some sort of repercussions for them if they don't perform a certain way. I don't really know what's behind the scenes on that. I only have access to what we see as fans of these artists and just general consumers. This idea of being obsessed with chart performance is why I think the industry is kind of cooked here. And the need to implement a merch rule like that suggests that artists are engaging in tactics to get to #1, that the artists themselves are kind of chart performance obsessed. The same way that stans are. I'm not really sure why. I guess for a lot of people, it's hard to discuss art and discuss the merit of music or movies or whatever else because they're all subjective. So most people will look for something objective that they can point to, and the only objective thing that we have are numbers. So for example, if I'm a stan of some artist and I don't know how to tell you that their music is better than the artist that you listen to, I'm just going to say that they outsold, right? That's what people do. And I feel like that has kind of infected the mentality of artists too. But really the reason I'm making this video is to talk about a new practice that has emerged, and that is courtesy of one Taylor Swift.
Hi, I'm the problem, it's me.
So Taylor Swift has been on this journey over the last few years to re-release her albums to sort of avoid continuing to pay Scooter Braun. That's some music industry executive that owns the masters for a good number of her older albums, and she's done so pretty successfully. They've all kind of performed well, but I wonder if that process has warped her view of the music industry and her own output, and viewing it more as a product than art. Because in the time that she's done that, she's become a billionaire. And I feel like becoming a billionaire has to change something in you. I don't know. I can't think of many, if any, well-adjusted billionaires. Most of them are kind of unhinged. But anyway, she has this practice with a lot of these albums of releasing all these vinyl variants. That's a topic for another video. A lot of artists do the vinyl variants. I think that that's kind of fun, though. Taylor's version of that is a little different because she kind of presents her vinyl variants as a collect them all. You know, with Midnights, for example, it was buy all 4 variants so you can create a clock. Today, I'm not here to talk about physical media. What I'm talking about is the proliferation of these digital deluxe bundles. So this year, Taylor Swift releases an album, The Tortured Poets Department. It is, in my estimation, the worst album she's ever released. I feel like people are going to hear me say that and think I'm just a hater, but honestly, I like a lot of her music. Most Taylor Swift albums I go in, there's maybe going to be 5 or 6 songs that I really enjoy, and then I come out the other side and I'm like, you know what, that was fine. I had a good time. I've got some songs I loved. The Tortured Poets Department was a torturous listening experience. You know, I listened to her album right when it came out, the night that it came out actually, and there was only one song that I liked, and I was kind of shocked because usually I find quite a few more, and there were a lot more just cringeworthy and groan-inducing lyrics. And then by the time I finished the album, I looked online and I noticed that she had done something pretty bizarre. She had released a deluxe version of the album, which was an entire second album tacked on. This is known as the Tortured Poets Department Anthology. So it was another, 16, 17 tracks, whatever it was. I listened to those. On the back half, I might have found 1 or 2 that I liked, but for me to only find 2 or 3 songs that I like on all these, like 30-something songs, it's just really not good. Obviously, it went #1, and there was no surprise there. Of course, it was going to. But from what I could see, I don't think it was performing the way that some of her albums usually do. Of course, there was at least one big single with Fortnite. Of course, a song is going to go #1 right when the album comes out. And of course, it's going to be the song that's called Fortnite and also features Post Malone. I mean, that has everything going for it. Really, as time has gone on, I feel like the biggest Taylor Swift song that I've heard, if I'm, out in the wild, it seems to be a resurgence of Cruel Summer, which is a song I had completely forgotten about. I had to look up what album that was from. That was back from Lover. That song has had a big year, and I can't really say the same about anything from the Tortured Poets Department. This is a genuine question for all the neutral people watching this, not the Swifties, not the haters. Can you name any Taylor Swift song from the Tortured Poets Department? Have you heard any? Outside of listening to the album itself, have you heard any other Taylor Swift songs this year? Because I feel like the only one that I've heard is Cruel Summer. And she's doing her thing. She's touring all over the world. She's very busy, I presume. But I feel like she has to be aware that the reception of this album was a little shaky. I mean, there were a lot of critics who didn't really like it. There were critics who were afraid to attach their name to their reviews because they knew that the stands were going to come for them. And of course, there were critics who gushed and called it an instant classic, and those critics were reposted on Taylor Swift's Instagram account. It's a weird ecosystem she created, but when you're a billionaire, you can do that. Anyway, of course, when an album that big comes out, it's going to dominate the charts for a couple weeks. That's normal. And then people just kind of move on. And with Taylor Swift, it happens. With any artist, it happens. But for some reason, I feel like Taylor Swift was not willing to let that happen this time. Interesting, of course, because it seems like one of the most move-onable albums she's ever released. But she had to bring out a new tactic to keep herself in the conversation and atop the charts. And that new tactic was these digital deluxe bundles. So the way this worked was she would release a variation of her album that would include 1 bonus track. And in order to acquire that 1 bonus track, you had to pay about $5 or $6 to get the entire album plus the 1 bonus track. Certain weeks she would release, 2 or 3 new demo tracks. So if in a week she released 3 demos for 3 of her songs, that meant if you really wanted to hear or acquire all 3 of those, you had to buy the album 3 times over to get just those 3 songs. You didn't have the option to just buy the song and not get the album bundled with it. You had to buy the entire thing. And with the collect them all mentality, Swifties are going to buy all of these because they want to hear everything that she makes. So that meant every week, lining up at the Taylor Swift office and seeing what she had to hand out. Lining up and knocking on the door of the Tortured Poets Department and asking what the assignment was for the weekend. It's kind of a bizarre practice. And yeah, to me, it sounds almost identical to the merch bundling. The problem with the merch bundling was, you buy this merch, you get a free copy of the album, and there was no alternative. It just came with. Here, you buy this 1 deluxe song, you get the entire album included for free, and there's no alternative. You can't just buy the song. And I want to clarify here that I don't know how much is her decision versus a label decision, but of all the artists I'm going to talk about in this video, I feel like she is maybe in the most control of herself. Now, what happened was, for several months, she would release these new versions to kind of boost sales, curiously timed with other artists who released albums that were poised to go #1. And in doing so, she would maintain #1. And slowly but surely, she started creeping up on a record held by Stevie Wonder for an album to maintain #1 status from debut. Now look, Taylor, please leave Stevie alone. You already beat him for most albums of the year at the Grammys, and we know that that is because the Grammys are racist, but this one is different. This one, the Grammys have no say in this, right? This is the people, right? It is the people that decide what to buy. Anyway, thankfully, the way this streak concluded is that the rap god himself, Eminem, thank you for your service, sir. He stood up to the plate and he protected Stevie Wonder by releasing an album that wasn't very good, but it performed well. It's Eminem. Of course, Eminem's going to go #1. So that ended the Taylor Swift streak, but it didn't end her shenanigans. It didn't end this practice. And as you'll see, a lot of artists have started following suit, and it's getting pretty concerning. In doing some research on this, I want to point out that you might be able to find some articles out there where Billboard says that no, Taylor Swift's digital deluxe versions are not actually helping her maintain her spot on the charts. Like, I'm not inclined to just take them at their word, so I did my own research. I did a little investigative journalism, and I'm going to show you guys what I came up with here. So here we have, from Billboard, the number of weeks that she sat at #1. Most consecutive, and then a few after Eminem took over. There was another one in here I've never even heard of. But after Eminem hit #1, she came back to #1 a little bit after that. Really what I want to get into are 3 specific dates on this chart. I've highlighted these 3 dates because each of these show a spike in album sales, which is kind of unusual, especially for an album that's been out for months. As you can see, typically, an album starts to sell less and less as each week goes by. But on each of these 3 weeks, her own sales outpaced the previous week. So what's going on here? Well, honestly, one of the easy ways to answer that question is to see who else released an album on each of those weeks. So this first charting week in June, we see a pretty big spike. And who else released that same week? Another huge pop artist, Billie Eilish.
It's a craving, not a crush.
In recent years, Billie Eilish has been critical of some artist practices, including vinyl variants. People, of course, are viewing that as a veiled shot or shade at Taylor Swift. I can't disagree with them. But Taylor Swift's not going to let that slide, right? Billie has to respect her elders. I don't feel that way. I'm saying that she does. So Billie Eilish puts out her album, Hit Me Hard and Soft. It's pretty good. I like that one. What does Taylor Swift do? She releases a few new versions of the Tortured Poets Department with these deluxe tracks where you have to buy an entire album just to get the one deluxe song. And of course, that counts as an album sale. And when you're Taylor Swift and you have stans that are willing to buy all 3 of these, that's 3 album sales per person, weeks, if not months after this album has come out. And sure enough, boom, it was enough to take #1 over Billie Eilish. So that one, very blatant, very obvious what happened there. Now the next one on this list, I was expecting to see Charlie XCX because that was a big one. But just as an aside here, it also seems like there was some issue with Charlie XCX, but that may have been exclusive to the UK charts because Charlie did not get even #2 on the US. I think she hit #3 with Brat, but she did debut at #2 on the UK charts. And of course, right before that happened, very conveniently, Taylor Swift released versions in the UK only of her album. If that's not indicative of what she was doing, I don't know what is. The second one on here is not Charlie, but in fact, Zack Bryan.
To blame the dealer on a losing hand.
Zack Bryan, if you don't know, is a country artist. I reviewed his album recently. It's very good. I love it. His album performed very well. He's a very successful, popular country artist. I think it's really cool to see somebody like him be popular because it's not the typical country sound. His album did really well, but not well enough. And yeah, I think part of the reason, again, is because Taylor Swift released more digital deluxe bundles that you could only buy for a limited time. So when you introduce stuff like limited time only, again, that's that collector mentality. You're preying on your stans. Curiously enough, I found this article talking about this that attributed even more sales to CD releases that had already come out, but now were restocked for a limited time. So again, forcing people into a corner where it's like, you better buy this now before you can't ever again. And yeah, that's how she managed to prevent Zack Bryan from having #1. And the last one in here, which comes after the streak was broken, after Eminem went #1, this is where things get interesting, right? Because this third spike is the same week that Kanye West and Ty Dolla $ign dropped Vultures 2. I don't have the time to get into the Taylor Swift Kanye backstory. You should know that by now. If you don't, I'm sure there's videos covering that. It would take an entire video to do that. But obviously there's bad blood between the two of them. And I said things got interesting on this one, and the reason is because Ye and Ty Dolla $ign started doing the same thing. Taylor Swift releases her digital deluxe bundles, and so do the Vultures. There's, I think, 4 different deluxe variants of the album, each with one different song. If you are a big Kanye fan and you want to hear all the songs he's making, you got to buy the album 4 more times. At a discounted rate, mind you, $5 probably, just like Taylor. But yeah, what are we doing? Why is this the case? I say this as somebody who's been a gamer for a long time and has watched the industry in gaming shift to microtransactions and battle passes where you buy a game or sometimes get the game for free and are just expected to continue paying for it over and over. I don't want that to seep into the music industry. I don't want it to be the case that if you really want to hear this album, you got to keep buying it every week. This is a live service. This is a subscription service for music. The Vultures 2 one is even crazier because Kanye notoriously releases albums unfinished. This one's no exception. And everybody's talking about it like patch notes. Now, I want to make a point here that I have nothing against artists setting the value of their work. They should be entitled to tell us how much it's worth. I don't think that's a problem. You have guys like Mock Hami out here who charge ridiculous prices for their albums, and that's fine. If you have fans that are willing to pay that, so be it. And if not, you're creating some kind of relic. Remember when the Wu-Tang released one copy of their album for $1 million? That was bought by Martin Shkreli, one of the worst people on earth. If you want to charge $5 for a song, that's okay. I'm sure people are going to pay that if you're a big enough artist and you have devoted enough fans. The problem here is not the $5 price tag. It's the fact that each digital deluxe track purchase comes with an entire album, so it counts as another purchase of the album. When the going rate for the album may have been, $15 to $20 upon release, and now people are able to buy it for $5 just to get that deluxe track, and yet that counts as an album sale. It seems a little crazy, right? It seems like this is very obviously a loophole that artists are able to exploit to maintain their status or to get number 1 on the billboards. Why do they care so much? What is going on behind the scenes? I don't know. But yeah, so Kanye West and Taylor Swift have another face-off. This time, this is what I would describe as a mid-off because, frankly, Vultures 2 and The Tortured Poets Department are both the worst albums that either artist has released in their catalog, in my opinion, of course. But man, what a year for Titans to fall, am I right? Katy Perry, Taylor, Kanye, Drake. We're starting to see the cracks, aren't we? Anyway, I'm worried that things are getting a little strange. I'm worried that the industry caught on to what Taylor Swift is doing, and maybe they're trying to do that behind the scenes. Again, like I said, with artists as big as Kanye and Taylor Swift, I feel like those two are in control of what's going on. They get to make the decisions to release these versions. I'm not so sure if that's the case for other artists, but it wasn't long until we saw another face-off like this. Most recently, it was Travis Scott and Sabrina Carpenter.
All I'm asking, baby, please.
Travis Scott enters the ring with a re-release of his mixtape Days Before Rodeo, which came out 10 years ago and was free as a mixtape. But now you can buy it digitally if you're into that sort of thing. Now it's also on streaming. And he's also doing physical releases, which is cool. And then, of course, Sabrina Carpenter is a pop star who's released a big album following some very successful singles. It's kind of her breakout album, even though she's been making albums before. But her album's short and sweet, and Travis Scott's re-release of Days Before Rodeo happened at the same time. Now, the reason I'm speculating as to who's calling the shots behind these two artists is because of Barbenheimer. Barbenheimer was this big cultural event that occurred with the release of Oppenheimer and the Barbie movie on the same day, and it just kind of became this big cultural flash fire. It was really fun. Something like that doesn't come along very often, and it can't be manufactured, really. It just happened. Part of me wonders if the labels at play here were trying to create a new Barbenheimer with Travis Scott and Sabrina Carpenter. I don't think the comparison is all that far-fetched because Sabrina Carpenter very much is going for this sort of classic Barbie pinup style aesthetic, and Travis Scott, I mean, he is not a nuclear physicist, but he did make a song for a Christopher Nolan movie, so I'm going to draw that connection there. Anyway, what happens is on the last day of the charting week, both Sabrina Carpenter and Travis Scott go head-to-head with a blast of all these deluxe variants of their albums. I think Sabrina Carpenter releases 3, and Travis Scott, I believe, releases 6. It's like 4 vault versions, each with 1 or 2 tracks, and then a full live version that he performed, and then also a chopped and screwed version, which, again, we're talking about a mixtape that was free 10 years ago. A chopped and screwed variant, yeah, that's a common thing, but that's also something that's usually free as a mixtape. But hey, you could pay $5 to Travis Scott. It counts as an album sale for him, and you get that, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing. To add just another wrinkle to this, Sabrina Carpenter tweets out that she was doing this for Nicki Minaj, that she was trying to basically get revenge for the fact that Travis beat her out for #1 with Astroworld. It's kind of funny, it's kind of cheeky, but at the same time, it's incredibly transparent that, yeah, you're just trying to get #1. And we all knew that, but I feel like hearing it from the artists themselves is just kind of disappointing. It's like, man, we don't need that. So to make a long story short, the final tally had Sabrina Carpenter over Travis Scott for #1 by, it might have been like 600 album sales or something. Pretty crazy to see it come down to the wire like that. I predicted on Twitter that if Travis did win this, that Billboard would change the rules again, because they changed it the last time he beat somebody out. I have a feeling they might change the rules anyway, because the count was delayed by a day or two, and it kind of makes them look unprofessional, and they have to be aware of how goofy and scummy this practice is. It did not create some kind of Barbenheimer thing. It just created a lot of angry stands on Twitter, and we don't need to fuel that fire in any way. So what's the point of this video? Is the music industry cooked? I am concerned. I'm concerned mostly just about the hyper-commercialization of music. Music is a form of art, and artists create for the sake of creation, but when numbers become too strong of a focus, artists start to create to hit certain milestones or to sell a certain number of albums, and then it's like you're not creating for the love of the art or the game itself, you're creating to sell something. It brings me back to, I remember saying this about Drake in another video, that McDonald's sells billions of burgers all the time, but are they that good? I mean, is McDonald's really the best burger you've ever had? Probably not. I do think Sabrina Carpenter's is really good, and Days Before Rodeo is great too. It's not his best though. For Tortured Poets Department and Vultures too. Look, if those albums truly were that good, they wouldn't have to create all those versions to sell, would they? No. So yeah, I do kind of think the industry is in trouble, because I don't know what a rule about this is going to do. I think people are going to find a way to game the system, to scam their way to the top of the charts or maintain that chart position in one way or another. Maybe it will be Taylor Swift again leading the charge, as she is the crafty billionaire that she's become. Maybe the next one will be whatever Travis Scott decides to do 5 years from now. But yeah, thank you all for watching. And if any of you are somebody who has spent $700 on Taylor Swift albums this year, let me know. I'd love to hear your experience.